Busy night in Florida as all sorts of watches and warnings are up, and we're going to go through them as Hurricane Ian continues to strengthen rather quickly in the Northwest Caribbean. We'll have more on Ian and a really kind of complicated long range with regards to that, at least in my view. Also, we have autumn weather spreading through the east and south this week. Some of that autumn dry air is going to have a hand in what Hurricane Ian does. We'll have more on that. And, well, I guess we'll have more on that tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show, brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware at 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon, New York, in southwest Suffolk County on Long Island. And they've got everything you need to make sure your home looks good, is working properly, and is protected in case we get some adverse weather like they're going to get in Florida. And that includes maybe upgrading to a new and stronger generator or sump pumps or as simple as flashlights and batteries. Get over to Omni. And, of course, if you're landscaping your yard this fall to make sure it looks good, lots of mulch and topsoil, and come winter time, lots of salt. 631-756-1125 is the telephone number, and the website is
OmniTrueValue.com. Hello, everybody.
Hi there. Actually, I have to tell you, it was a nice 2 days off, sort of. I mean, I had a 10-hour drive yesterday from Georgia down to Florida. It's a big difference from waking up in the morning in the 40s and waking up here in the low 70s with kind of soupy air, but it's nice. It rained today, and I'm under a tropical storm watch here in eastern Florida. I'm on the east coast of Florida, and I want to make it clear, Joe, I'm not here to storm chase. I planned this trip back weeks ago.
Long before everything got very active on the tropics.
Correct. So
That's amazing. It's amazing how, and I've said this before, how dead it was in the tropics during July and August, and well, maybe we won't have much of a tropical cyclone season. And look what has happened. Look what's happened just the last week. I mean, my goodness, Bermuda, Puerto Rico, Atlantic Canada. That was from Fiona, and now all attention turns to Ian and what it's going to do to Florida. Amazing.
I'm having a difficult time trying to figure Ian out because there's just so many puzzle pieces here. I think one of the bigger mysteries is going to be all this dry air that's moving into the eastern part of the U.S., but particularly the southern flank on that is moving down into the Gulf states. You and I talked about this both on and off camera regarding dry air eventually getting entrained. On the other hand, it could, if it's far enough south, it might stay in that tropical environment for a whole lot longer. Then you have the issue of the fact that as it approaches Tampa, it's going to be slowing down, and that's going to prolong both the rain and the wind. Starting to think that maybe the rain is going to be the bigger deal here before it's all said and done, but give me another day to figure that part of it out.
Well, I think the key to this hurricane is the fact that, unlike Fiona, which, as it was approaching Atlantic Canada, was really revving up and moving along with forward speed of 40 or even 50 miles an hour, this storm is going to be moving much more slowly. And in fact, the slow movement parallel to the west coast of Florida is really going to serve to do a number on the west coast of Florida, places like Tampa Bay and also St. Petersburg, Sarasota. These are places that are going to be subjected to many, many, many hours of hurricane force winds in excess of 75 miles an hour. And the piling up of the water, Joe, I mean, we talk about storm surges, but literally with the slow movement and the push of water inland, that water, again, piling out, there won't be any place to put it. And that will lead to some places getting major flooding, not just from any potential torrential rainfall, but from flooding from coastal areas. So this storm really is going to be loaded for bear, and there's going to be all kinds of problems, especially Wednesday on through Thursday. The storm may make landfall along about Friday, further to the north of Tampa and St. Petersburg, and may even weaken, I think. Could be as much as a Category 3 storm, Wednesday and Thursday, but then diminish from there as it approaches landfall on Friday.
Yeah, the last Anthony Orr, our resident hurricane statistician here on the Joe and Joe Weather Show, pointed out that you have to go back almost to 2000. You have to actually go back to 2003 when Hurricane Charlie came in to the Florida West Coast, and there have been storms that have come on the Big Bend, and there's storms that have come on the Panhandle, but it's been fairly quiet along, the up and down part of the west coast of Florida since 2003. So this is going to be an interesting experience. Irma made landfall in Southwest Florida and came up just inland, going back a few years ago. So in case you're saying, well, what about Hurricane Irma? Well, that's probably a little bit different. The area from, say, north of Fort Myers, certainly the area around Tampa Bay, it's been a long, long time since they've seen a storm like this. The other thing, Joe, is it's a little odd here in that when you look at the wind direction of a storm that is going to be doing, and let me get my little thing here. So if you're going to have something that's going to sort of come in like this and slow down at the same time, and of course, let's say if it takes this track on the arrow that I drew, and I don't know that it's just going to be correct or not, but you're going to have mostly south winds on the east side of this, pushing this water into a narrower and narrower area. And Tampa Bay ain't that deep. So that water is going to, could certainly pile in there. I would defer to anyone who knows the area better, because I want to, put a little footnote here. I don't know this part of Florida very well, so I could be speaking out of turn here, but this is what it seems to me. I'm sure the folks at the Weather Service there know far better than I, and I think they should be maybe your go-to place for more additional information regarding potential impacts in that area.
Yeah, this is not. I mean, probably a worst case would be if the storm were heading in toward, let's say, New Orleans, where they're actually, I think, a little bit below sea level. But this particular setup is not good at all, and especially, again, the key to this is the very slow movement. The storm is going to take really at least a couple of days to go from the southern area of the Florida Peninsula on up northward along the west coast to the northern part of Florida by Thursday and Friday. So it's going to be rough. It'll be rough with the wind. It's going to be rough with the storm surge. It'll be rough because of the heavy-duty rainfall that is anticipated. Some places in Florida may receive in excess of 10 or 12 inches, more than a foot of rain with all of this. So it is just one big, gigantic headache, and that is going to be the story for, again, much of this week, watching the future movements, the future trek of Ian.
So I've got the hurricane tracking models up, Joe, and they've been an adventure to watch all weekend long, gradually shifting to the west until they stopped shifting to the west and north, and now they're shifting back to the south and east. And I'm noticing that on the latest runs at 18Z, we have a couple of models that have now pushed it landfall down near Fort Myers. You've got a cluster of models that seem to have a landfall near Tampa, and now a handful that have it in the Florida Big Bend. What all I seem to have in common is the actually, there are a couple of odd model runs here that make no sense to me, Joe. There's a couple of them, like the ones that run into southeast Georgia. Those have it making landfall in 48 hours. So that seems to be a bit early. On the other hand, you've got a couple of them that have it well up into the north part of the Florida West Coast they don't have landfall for another 6 days. So that also probably seems a bit much. So I'm going to just kind of focus on the ones that are close together. I guess the Florida West Coast, let's say Tampa, outside chance it could be a little further north than that, outside chance it could be a little further south. And then after that, eh, think back to Hurricane Ida. Now, Ida went in southwest Louisiana. So it was pretty unusual for us to have a storm that went inland that far west, but the setup was right, where it came up, turned east across the lower Ohio Valley, and as we know, it came over New York City and New Jersey and Long Island and the Hudson Valley and southwest Connecticut and eastern PA and devastated some areas with record rainfalls. Okay, the difference here, Joe, is I think that because we're dealing with this dry air, whereas Ida had this moist tropical environment in the eastern United States, this one does not. So I'm wondering, once it gets inland and starts to get far enough north, it gets up into Georgia and maybe gets up into western South Carolina. I mean, how much of a core are you going to actually have left? And it'll become nothing more than an area of, say, spreading rain that that with a non what will ultimately be like a non-tropical system once it's well inland. I'm going in that direction right now.
I agree with you, and I think that's why a few moments ago I said that the storm could get up to. Now I've actually seen reports, some forecasts that say that possibly it may even get to a Category 4 at one stage of the game. But my feelings are it's going to rev up to at least a 3, 111 to 130 mile per hour sustained winds near the center. That would be for Wednesday and Thursday. But then after that, it's going to begin to interact with that drier air to the north. And that's going to help to, I think, diminish it down to a Cat 2, even a Cat 1. And then it may make landfall sometime during the first part of the day near Cedar Key in Florida. At least that's my projection. In fact, Joe, if you allow me to share, I'll reveal with everybody the track that I came up with and I sent out to you earlier on in the day today as to where this may or may not be going.
Sharing capabilities have been initiated.
Alrighty.
I just have to put you on the screen. Just give me a moment here. And you're on the air.
Well, there you go. Whoops, wait a minute. Hold on. I don't know what happened there for a moment. I know what I can do. There you go. So there you see, this is the track. Now, what you're seeing on the screen right now is the projected path of EN based solely on 2 models, the 12Z GFS, the 12Z European run, the operational runs, not the ensemble or the Samble runs.
Ann Samble, dear Ann Samble, such a lovely, lovely lady. We know her well.
And so I've got the storm coming almost on a due north trajectory, very close to, now right here, where you see that little cutout, that's where Tampa, St. Pete is, and Clearwater is up here, and Sarasota's not too far away to the east. And so you see, I don't have it making landfall. It might, this is, a forecast based solely on 2 models. The spaghetti plots are based on a number of other models. It may very well make landfall in the vicinity of Tampa or St. Pete, but I've got it going northward up to about Cedar Key, which is right about here, maybe around midday on Friday. Then as it moves over the land, I think the storm is going to lose a lot of its punch in terms of wind, so that it'll probably be just a depression Saturday morning over southern Georgia, continuing north-northwest into northwestern Georgia by Sunday morning, and then being caught up by the more robust westerly winds. The remnants of whatever is left of Ian will be rapidly pushed eastward across the Carolinas to near the coast on Monday and maybe off the coast by Tuesday. By the way, I know we have a lot of baseball fans out there, an interesting scenario may be shaping up, Joe. As you can see, the storm will be tracking into northern Florida and eventually into Georgia this weekend. Well, those of you who are especially fans of the New York Mets know Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the Mets will be playing a 3-game series in Atlanta, and this could very well decide which team, the Braves or the Mets, end up winning the National League Eastern Division Championship. But if Ian comes northward into this position Saturday and Sunday, you just know that Georgia is going to be covered with rain and showers and possibly even some thunderstorms as well. And there could be a lot of rain. I mean, I've seen from the Weather Prediction Center forecast of 2 to 4 or 3 to 5 inch rains across much of Georgia for the period Friday through Sunday. So now, what are they going to do? Well, you say, no problem. They'll, if the games are rained out, they'll just wait until maybe the later on in the season. Well, the season, for goodness sake, is going to come to an end next Wednesday, followed immediately by the playoffs. There's no room for, putting any rain-out games at the end of the season. And so if one of these games is rained out, they'll probably play it as a doubleheader, either Saturday or Sunday. If 2 or more games are rained out, that causes a big problem. And there has already been a discussion by Major League Baseball, a discussion that if indeed Ian does play a role in the weather this weekend, what they may very well do is play those 3 games, not in Atlanta, but in another ballpark, a neutral ballpark, away from the rains, maybe Kansas City or Minnesota, some ballpark that's not going to be under the gun, so to speak, by weather. Of course, naturally, Atlanta, the Braves, who would have home field advantage this weekend, are not happy with that at all and are going to probably fight this. But I don't think they can do much. They can do if Ian comes northward and spreads all of that potential heavy rain over Georgia, over your area too, Joe, and
Yes.
also across much of Florida as well. So this is going to be an interesting conundrum for those who are into baseball and may play a big role in who eventually wins the National League Eastern Division title at the end of the baseball season.
Well, that is their problem and not mine. I mean, I get essentially. Yeah, it's going to be very, very difficult. And you're sitting here on a Monday trying to figure out what's going to be going on at the end of the week, and that makes it that much tougher. The latest the latest recon from Ian is there. What before I get into that, let me just say big hellos and welcomes to everybody on the chat board tonight, and welcome to those of you who are new to the Joe and Joe Weather Show. These storms often attract new people, and we always like to see everybody here. The Joe and Joe Weather Show is on every night, Monday through Thursday at 7:30, Sundays at 11 a.m., and sometimes during storms, if they happen on a Friday and Saturday, we're going to be on a Friday and Saturday. So maybe Joe and I are going to be on at the end of the week. We'll let you know, and into the weekend. If you do like what you see, please by all means hit the like button, because Joe and I love it when we get lots of likes, especially when we go up over 100. So help us get over 100 likes tonight. And in the meantime, let's look at the Recon. The latest Recon is there, and sending back some obs, Joe. A couple of things I'm noticing off the bat. One is the pressure on the advisory was carried at 972, so they found on the first pass 967. So we've dropped 5 millibars in the last 3 hours. And also I'm seeing a belt of 96 to 113 knot winds to the southeast of the center. That's being observed. And let's see if we can look at it graphically and take a look at what they're seeing. Now, the red is the mean sea level pressure, and it touches 965. Now, they do a correction with the pressure. There's certain corrections that they do. So sometimes the number that's found here on the map doesn't always match what's on the advisory. And this was measured, by the way, at 7:17. So not a little more than half an hour ago. The last ob on here is from 23:47, so from 6 minutes ago. But they had a wind, Joe, a wind max here of about, I would guess, 95 knots, and the pressure, as I said, down to about 965. So it looks like the rapid strengthening trend that began earlier today is continuing.
What, Joe?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, he just suddenly cut off.
Oh, no, I'm here. Did you hear
okay.
what I was talking about with the pressure?
Yes.
Okay.
How it's dropping and everything else. Yeah.
Okay.
That's...
This is where you come in and save me so I can catch a breath and set up the next map.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, as you can obviously see, it is strengthening, and probably one of the reasons why it's strengthening is it's moving over very warm water. It will be moving through the Yucatan Channel. It may lose a little bit of its strength as it passes over the extreme western end of Cuba, but really that particular part of Cuba is not terribly elevated. I mean, it'd be one thing if it were interacting with, 5 or 10,000 foot mountains, but it really isn't. It is passing over land, however, and briefly being robbed of some of the moisture and some of the warm waters that it's interacting with now that's making it, rev up. But I don't think that's going to be very much. It won't really play much of a role in diminishing the storm. The storm itself will be, again, in the Gulf of Mexico, off the west coast of Florida, probably in very warm waters Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And by that time, we should see it rev up again, at least to a Category 3. And maybe, just maybe, it might even briefly reach Category 4. Now, that's kind of scary when you have a Category 4 storm 50 or 100 miles off your shoreline. It's even scarier if you are in the crosshairs and the thing might actually be heading right for you. But as I said, it looks like the storm during its maximum or most potent phase will be staying just offshore, moving parallel on a northerly course relative to the west coast of Florida. And as it continues to move northward, I think that by later Thursday and Friday, it will begin to actually wind down or lose a little bit of its potency back to a Cat 2 or maybe even a Cat 1. And again, I think during the first part of Friday, it may make landfall near or around Cedar Key in Florida. And then once it makes landfall and continues north, it will very rapidly get the wind literally knocked out of it. But a lot of that tropical moisture will be wrung out over the land. And again, there will be some parts of Florida that could see upwards to 5 or even 10 inches or more of rainfall, leading to tremendous flooding, not just coastal flooding with the water piling up, but also flooding from heavy-duty rainfall. And Joe just put up on the map WPC's totals for rainfall with this storm. And as you can see, there are some places that could very well receive upwards to, 8 and 10 inches. And just offshore the west coast of Florida, you see amounts even greater, something on the order of 20 inches of rain. But again, a lot of that presumably is going to fall over the eastern Gulf of Mexico.
And I'm sure most people in that part of Florida, in the inland part of Florida, would say, keep it there, because that's almost double the rainfall that's being indicated just inland, with the orange area, which is generally 6 to 10, and the dark blue pushing further north up into North Georgia of 2 to 4 inches, and also at the South and North Carolina. Got to give a lot of credit, though, to WPC, because over the weekend on their 7-day rainfall forecast maps, if you looked at them, you would get a feeling that they had a different outlook. While the models were sort of bringing this thing inland, and some of them taking it up the west side of the Appalachians, and even taking what looked like a remnant low to southern Indiana. On a couple of model runs, they were pretty insistent with this sort of idea of painting a soaking rain up through the Carolinas and maybe even into southern Virginia, and they've stayed with that. And as every day goes by, it's looking, at least to me, that is going to be the case. I also had the intensity guidance up there while you were talking, Joe, and I just want to make a point. with the factors of it slowing down, with the factors of it eventually when it gets close to land, if it slows down, you're going to have part of the circulation over land. It'll probably get to a strong Cat 3, or if the intensity guidance is right, you have actually more than just a couple of models taking this to a Cat 4. So I don't know if I were sitting up in that area looking at a Cat 4 hurricane approaching and then saying, well, they're saying that it's going to weaken because it's going to slow down and interact with land, and yeah, and there's dry air that's going to come in from the north. So I'm going to make a decision based on that. I don't know. I would be kind of leery over hanging around uh, and banking on all of those things happening, because you know what? If one of those things changes, then that could certainly impact what happens in when it approaches the Florida coast. Maybe it doesn't weaken as rapidly. Maybe the dry air gets delayed, or doesn't get entrained into the circulation because the storm might wind up being a little bit further south. I would just kind of like, if it was me, I would look at this and say, you know what, could be a Category 4 hurricane. I'm better off evacuating and not. I'm sure you agree with me, Joe. I'm far better off evacuating. If something doesn't happen, then you thank God something didn't happen and you move on. And if something does happen, well, at least you're away, you're safe, and then you can deal with the aftermath afterwards.
Yeah, but the sad part about it is that there's always going to be somebody. Always. I don't care if you're dealing with a Category 5 storm. There's always going to be somebody who's going to say, I've been living here for 66 years, and I've seen all kinds of storms. I remember Betsy, and I remember Alma, and I'm not moving. I'm going to stay right here in my house, and I'm not going to, there's always somebody out there who does that. And then you always hear in the aftermath of the storm about some old timer who unfortunately didn't want to move and instead got swept away with the heavy rains and floods and that sort of thing. Every storm, every impending hurricane always has somebody like that or some people like that. And I'm sure Wednesday and Thursday we'll be hearing about just such. I heard it this morning. Somebody from the Tampa, St. Petersburg police saying, hey, look, we want you to evacuate. And if you don't evacuate and it's right in the middle of the storm and we get a phone call saying, help me get out, we may very well tell you we can't help you and hang the phone up. That's how it will be. That's how it always seems to be. And I would agree. You have your chance now. Get out while you can.
Still waiting for the 8 o'clock advisory, the 5 o'clock advisory, 20.3 north, 83.2 west. Top winds are 100 miles an hour on that advisory, moving north-northwest at 13. And we should have the 8 o'clock one momentarily. I don't think they're going to change very much, but I do want to at least come back up full screen. I'd like to go over the warnings because there's quite a few of them and the changes. So let me bring myself over here, and we'll see if the actual printed, sometimes they don't update the map up. The 8 o'clock advisory is in, and on the 8 o'clock advisory, 20.8 north, 83.3 west, 130 miles southeast of the western tip of Cuba. Maximum sustained winds are still carrying 100 miles an hour, moving north-northwest or 330 degrees at 13, 965 millibars. 28.50 inches. So some people may ask, well, Joe, the pressure's dropped from 972 to 965. How come the wind stayed the same? Sometimes what happens is that with strengthening storms, that the pressure actually drops first, and then the winds catch up. And sometimes the opposite happens. Sometimes you have the winds that are strong, but they don't always match the pressure. And you're thinking, that the pressure's actually higher than you would otherwise observe given a wind speed, and then ultimately the pressure drops and it catches. Those two things do happen from time to time. It's more common to see the pressure drop first and then the wind pick up afterwards. So I expect those wind numbers to start to go up. So let's go over a couple of things here, Joe. I'm just going to go through some of these warnings. So you have a warning in effect for Cuba. In Cuba, the Isle of I'm getting myself into trouble by doing this. The Isle de Juventud, Juventud, Pinar del Rio, and Artemisa. Also, we have hurricane warnings now in Florida, so this is a little easier. From Englewood to Anclote, Anclote River, including Tampa Bay and the Dry Tortugas. We've got, I'm going to skip the storm surge warnings, tropical storm warnings for the Cuban provinces of La Habana, Mayabeque, and Montezas. If I'm pronouncing it wrong, please forgive me. Lower Florida Keys from the 7 Mile Bridge westward to Key West, Flamingo to Inglewood. We've got warnings. Hurricane Watch is up north of the Anclote River to the Swanee River, way down upon the Swanee. And Bonita Beach, we know the Swanee River was written by Ed Norton. And Bonita Beach to Inglewood. Tropical storm watch is also up for the Florida Keys. From the 7 Mile Bridge to the Channel 5 Bridge and Lake, also for Lake Okeechobee, north of the Swanee River to Indian Pass, and on the East Coast, Jupiter Inlet to Altamaha Sound. Okay, so there you have it with respect to the watches and warnings.
Should have hired Ricky Ricardo to do the proper
what a help.
The proper pronunciation of some of these names. By the way, Ms. Spallerite mentioning here as an FYI, the town that got hit real bad up in Newfoundland is setting up a GoFundMe plus requested list of needs to be sent to their local Lions Club. And 60% of the trees on Prince Edward Island were taken down by Fiona over the weekend. So that storm system really left a lot of devastation and damage in its path. And now we just wait to see what Ian plans to do to Florida in the next 2 or 3 days.
Dova asks, are these two retired meteorologists? Yes, we're sort of semi-retired. But we're here. And we're here 5 days a week. So actually, we're not retired. We're working every day, 5 days a week on this show. Correct, Joe?
Correct. We're here. We're here for you.
Yes. All right.
I mean, if we were retired, what would we do at this hour?
Yeah,
I'd probably be just finishing up watching MASH.
Exactly.
But I'm here. We have all of this knowledge. Remember in Rocky 1, the first Rocky, how Burgess Meredith was trying to get Rocky, Sylvester Stallone, to hire him as a manager. And he says, I have all of this knowledge. I have all of this. I want to share it with you. Well, here you got Joe and I, over 80 years of knowledge. What are we going to do with it? So here we are explaining and talking about such things as hurricanes. We want to share it all with you, especially those of you who might be watching down in Florida in advance of this next animal that heads your way.
And on that note, let's switch back. I want to go to the models and take a look at what's going on with those. And we've got I preset the GFS upper air so we can actually see how complicated it is. I'm going to say right off the bat for the area that we mostly cover directly, which is eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England and southern areas of the Northeast, the northern Mid-Atlantic states. It seems to me, Joe, that most of this should wind up getting suppressed to the south, and if everything plays according to plan, there might not be a drop of rain here, certainly through Saturday and possibly even through Sunday.
Absolutely. I had mentioned on discussion on my Facebook page, I said, okay, maybe, just maybe, we might be grazed by some shower activity Sunday and or Monday of next week. But it could just as well, as you just said, Joe, pass underneath us to the south. And the worst that we would see from it would be some cloud cover, and that would be it. Interestingly enough, there were some forecasts out of the Climate Prediction Center at the end of last week that were suggesting that Saturday and Sunday we would see heavy rains, strong winds. That is all gone by the board now.
Yeah.
It looks now that the most that this storm is going to do is indeed to Florida and parts of the southeast. And it looks like up here in our neck of the woods, here in the tri-state New York City area, again, we may miss out completely on that. And that could change. It's a 7-day outlook. We're looking all the way out to next Monday, and that could change. And if it does, we certainly will cue you in on that. But right now, the slower movement of the storm from recent forecasts, the slower movement and high pressure building or trying to build over the northeastern United States may actually help to hold most of the effects of that storm, the adverse effects of this storm, to our south.
And looking at the upper air, which is really kind of, it's very fascinating to me. Now the first frame here is from Friday, so the big dark spot on this map is actually, let me get rid of all these arrows. So right here is Fiona. Okay, so our system was just beginning. It was actually down here in the southeast Caribbean. I actually have that circle probably drawn a little bit too far west, but nonetheless, it played according to plan with regards to Fiona. It was underneath this big, very powerful trough in the east, and Fiona did what it did. And I looked at pressures, Joe, 930. I saw a lot of places in eastern Nova Scotia with a 934 pressure. So this is going to go down as the strongest storm ever to move into Atlantic Canada. But now that that's lifted out, of course, another strong trough right behind it. Now you start to see what is Ian down in the Northwest Caribbean. Now, this trough is drawing it northward, and if that trough did not get out of the way, what probably would happen is that it would go into Florida on the west coast and then escape to the northeast. That would be the logical place for it to go, given a trough that's down in the eastern part of the United States like this. But the problem is that trough is lifting out. So it draws Ian northward, but it doesn't completely grab it, and that's why it slows down, because once the trough pulls out, its influence on the storm lessens considerably, and then Ian's kind of left in this sort of no man's land. There's not really much of a flow going on in the southeastern part of the United States in the upper atmosphere. The steering currents remain, rather light, and it goes toward the northwest until the next trough can drop in. Sometime early next week, around Monday, you see all this energy dropping down in the northern plains, and that just basically kicks it out to the east. And then we get a major cold front to come through here sometime later next week. And beyond that, there's another deep trough that follows. I mean, this is boy, I have to tell you, if this verifies, Joe, if I was just looking at this out in the long range, that is one heck of a trough there toward the end of the forecast period. And actually a pattern that we probably haven't seen. This is like a real autumn pattern that started here late last week, and it looks like it's going to last out into the long range in the eastern part of the U.S.
We've had so many falls or autumns in recent years that have been so very warm. We had to wait until, November, December. Last year we had to wait until January before it finally cooled down. But you're right. If we get this trough, this upper level setup does indeed verify, it's going to be quite cool here, quite autumn-like, just when it's supposed to feel autumn-like as we move through into the month of October.
Now I've got the surface GFS, and of course which reminds me, there's a weird thing I want to show you. I saved it. I'll show it to you in a moment, but. Here's how the GFS handles Ian today, the latest run, bringing it up near Tampa Bay. And you can see how it slows down, by the way. It's actually moving relatively quickly at 15 miles an hour or so. And then it really slows down as we head into Wednesday night, Thursday. They're right off the coast, just southeast of Tampa. And it takes till almost early Friday morning for it to make its way inland. And of course, its proximity to land is going to start to weaken it. On the approach, Joe, on the GFS, it gets down to about a 9, 954, I think, is the lowest pressure that I'm seeing here. 954. And then it slowly starts to come up back into the 970s by the time it makes its final approach. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to show you here from this, as we were talking about this dry air, take a look at these dew points. I mean, it's ridiculous, some of the dew points that we're seeing down on the Florida Panhandle, Joe, on the GFS in western Florida on the Panhandle, 39. In southeast Mississippi, 38.
I thought it was impossible to see that far south at this particular time of the year.
What, dew points that low?
Yeah.
Well, if it's impossible, somebody forgot to tell the atmosphere. The depth of that dry air gets all the way down to Tallahassee. Now, again, if you start to go further south and you head toward the Florida Big Bend, and particularly when you get down to Tampa, where dew points are in the low 70s, it's a different story. But as I loop this, you can kind of see the dry air tries to get to funnel down and get involved. And I think that is going to be an important key in terms of what happens to the intensity here, because that is super dry air that's in the southeast, and it's very, when you look at the major hurricanes that have made landfall, Joe, they have almost all come in atmospheres that have been super saturated with, the tropical air just about everywhere, dew points in the upper 60s and low 70s, and you don't have that here in the areas further north. And again, if that dry air starts to get entrained in the circulation, that is going to impact the strength as it makes its way up the Florida West Coast or the Florida Big Bend. That is an unknown variable at this point. It's a known variable, but its impact is still unknown.
But I agree with you. That's what I was talking about just a few minutes ago, the interaction as the storm goes further north with that dry air really cutting down on the energy of it. And I think we'll see that beginning later Thursday, and especially so on into Friday as well. And then, again, once the storm moves over northern Florida and on up into Georgia, it likely will have the wind literally knocked out of it and have all that moisture wrung out in the form of very heavy rains.
I'm just looking here, by the way, longer range, to see all this dry air all over the place. This is a far cry from the last number of years where we had stretches of dew points in the upper 60s. And I can even remember a couple of times in early October where we had days with dew points up above 70 and just being absolutely atrocious. And it looks like at least this first part of October is going to be completely the opposite of that. Looking at the overall weather here in the eastern part of the United States, you'll notice that it's really delightful, but there's this the upper trough is spinning away, and there's a surface low, Joe, that's just east of Lake Huron this evening. And I want you to look at the satellite loop. If you look carefully, look at the northeastern part of Lake Huron, and it's weird. There's a donut hole circulation up there. Can you see it there on the loop?
Yes, vaguely, but I see what you're talking about.
That is very, very odd. Actually, Bill Goodman messaged me he says, "What the hell is that in Lake Huron?" And I looked at it. My first glance was not even to not look at it, but knowing that there were some severe weather boxes up there, I said, "Well, maybe it's a tornado." Well, I didn't realize he literally meant in Lake Huron, because then I would have said, "Well, maybe it's a water spout." I didn't realize he was talking about the satellite loop until I pulled it up. And then if you look on the radar, you can actually see how the echoes are in that sort of counterclockwise spiral here, with even a few severe thunderstorm warnings and special marine warnings that were up for parts of the shoreline of Ohio and western New York, believe it or not, and even a couple of scattered downpours upstate in north central New York and even in south central New York at the moment. And Joe, there's a line of showers and thunderstorms in central and eastern Connecticut into central Massachusetts.
Look how dramatic that is. It's like cutting diagonally right across Connecticut, just north of Rhode Island, and almost on up into the Boston area.
Yeah, let me pull up. I'll pull up let the U car. I got it here all set up, and we'll get the OKX radar first, and you see it there. In fact, hang on. Let me set this loop up. So we have the most recent image. Let's go back 3 hours and go to OKX. And yeah, I mean, look at these strongs. Look at that line. Oh my, that form there. That's pretty impressive. And as you said, to just west of Boston is where it's sitting at the moment. I'll even pull up the Boston radar where you can take a look at it from that perspective. And there you go.
Incidentally, last night at about 11:30 p.m. over eastern Long Island, they had an F0 tornado. Did you hear about that?
No, I know the weather was really rough last night with that cold front. The SPC had put a slight risk and a 2% tornado risk all over the place. And so I guess it played out according to plan, at least according to the forecast.
Right. It was about 11:30 last night. I noticed there was a severe thunderstorm warning over, I think, the North Fork of Long Island. And I said, wow. Here's the ironic thing about that, is that earlier in the day, when I was mentioning the possibility of severe weather, our mutual friend Pete Bergman, who lives out in Patchagui, I think, or is it Patchogue? Or it's a Patchogue, yeah. Patchogue. He says, well, I don't know about any activity out here because the sun isn't even out yet, and it has to really warm up some. Well, I guess later yesterday, the sun did come out and it did warm up enough, and it did get unstable enough because, again, out there last night, they had severe thunderstorm warning and, yes, a confirmed report of an F0 tornado that formed. So, yeah, they did. Sometimes these things, they pop up almost literally out of nowhere.
By the way, down in Florida right now, and I had some of this, there are some bands well north of where Ian is that have pushed up. So you can see these echoes here in South Florida, north of Miami. There's a band of some heavy downpours moving northward. There was a band that moved through where I am in Fort Pierce. That has pushed further north up toward Cape Canaveral and also on the west coast of the Tampa Bay area. And we're seeing some strong squalls coming in to the Keys. And I can't go much further south than that. You can sort of see the arc that is over western Cuba, that the center is still south of there. So getting some lead, far in advance lead rains from the circulation of Ian. We have also a little bit of activity going on in southeast Louisiana. In South Texas, we've got a few scattered showers and a little warning that popped up outside of Corpus Christi. And in the southwest, we're seeing some scattered showers in southeast Arizona, southwest New Mexico, and into southeastern parts of Colorado. So as far as the northeast is concerned, that big high coming down and the way the upper air is set up, it's, I think, really going to suppress this. I mean, here we are. This is Saturday morning, and it's got, the GFS anyway, has rain up through Virginia, some lighter rains into Delaware and just touching southern New Jersey. But remember, dew points are in the 40s here, so the air being very dry, as this rain pushes up, some of this may wind up not reaching the ground. And in fact, it tries to this is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday, where you see some rain touching South Jersey, the darker blues into Delaware, and then all of a sudden it gets pushed back south again, and it doesn't really come up until Sunday night, Monday morning, where you get a little bit of rain edging northward here on this latest run, Joe. It's actually got a low. I don't know if it's the old remnant low or some sort of frontal wave that develops somewhere, but there's a low that you could sort of tie into the remnant low of Ian. That's off the New Jersey coast come Monday and Tuesday with some rain. That would be one way that it does come up the East Coast, because if you do have, we talked about, Joe, it's in this no man's land, and you see the flow here on Saturday from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to New England. It's northwest. There's nothing really to pick it up. But if that next trough that drops into the plains early next week is a little faster and a little deeper, and the Ian system is still kind of lingering around someplace in North Carolina, then maybe it could, lift up northward. But it'll come, if that's going to happen, it'll come after. I think it'll come after the weekend.
Yeah, I think so too, Joe. I think a few days ago, the possibility of some kind of windy, rainy weather regime for the weekend was hanging like the sword of Damocles, if you will, over the heads of many in the tri-state New York area because of the future movement of Ian. But it looks like more and more now, because of the upper level weather patterns later in the week and that big high, as you pointed out, building on down from southern Canada, that much of the activity from Ian will stay south of the tri-state area. And again, if we do see anything, it may not come until, well, maybe a shower or two later Sunday or Monday, if that at all. And incidentally, for those of you who are wondering about where the EF0 tornado hit last night, it was confirmed in Mattatuck. That's on the North Fork, on the North Shore of Long Island, based on an analysis of the storm survey findings and the dual radar reflectivity from Autum, the National Weather Service Forecast Office, velocity and derived data. It was determined that in an EF0 tornado touchdown at Juniper Hills Farms around 11:17 p.m. last night, damaging a greenhouse, downing a couple of large trees on the property. Then it likely lifted or skipped along as it tracked east-northeast across a 1-mile stretch of remote wooded area before touching down and shearing off several treetops and large limbs in the vicinity of Cottage Way, Walnut Place, Lipko Road, between Sound Avenue and Old Sound Avenue. Peripheral straight-line wind damage to a large tree was noted near Shirley. Surely you jest. And to the north of Sound Avenue as well. So there you go. There was some action last night. No tornado, no hurricane, but a rather isolated tornadic event occurring again in the North Fork of Long Island.
Steve LaPointe hitting super chat tonight, Joe. Thank you, Steve. And didn't have to ask a second time. We got 107 likes. So that's great. We like to go over the 100 mark. Thank you for those of you who hit the like button. And if you haven't hit it, still plenty of time to hit the like button and make us even happier, which is a good thing. And I saw that my friend Junior's on the chat board talking about, I guess, talking in reference to the fact that I said that we were semi-retired, and I believe he responded back, because now, of course, I can't find it, that, he said semi-retired question mark. They're barely 25 years old. I love you. I love you, Junior. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Hey, don't laugh, Junior, because I was, according to my wife, I was already beginning to start turning gray when I was in my late 20s. Of course, it's pretty much taken over all of my head now.
See,
but
I have a colorist who the relationship with her is extremely sacred, Joe, and she dyes in my gray just perfectly. So you ought to get yourself a colorist and have a sacred relationship with this colorist, so that they can dye your white in just perfectly.
Hey, just because there's snow on the roof doesn't mean there's any fire in the furnace.
Well put. Well said. All right, let's finish up tonight. I promised Johnny Quest, because he had a bonus question to his. He was doing Briller Jeopardy while Scott's been away, and he had a bonus question, which so the bonus question was, what was the highest wave ever made by a tropical system?
Why don't I answer that with how about 50 feet?
Double.
Double that?
Double.
100 feet?
100 feet.
Oh my goodness. And that's just from a tropical system, folks. Not from a tsunami or which tropical system are we talking about, Joe?
Luis in 1995.
I remember Luis. 100 feet.
100
wow.
feet.
Holy mackerel.
And yeah, that was the bonus question, as I forgot to do it. Now let's see. I have Okay, so here we go. So actually, these questions um, are from Scott, and he's only going to send two of them this week. So this is his for today. And what was the highest temperature ever recorded in the month of October in New York City Central Park?
Um, I'll say, and it didn't happen it only happened a few years ago. 94.
Um, if 1941 is a few years ago, then I guess it is a few years ago relative to the entire existence of the planet. 94 in 1941. I don't
Now,
know
wait
that.
a minute.
Is there
Now, wait a
a
minute.
later date?
Didn't we hit 94 in early October in like 2018 or 2019 or whatever?
Honestly, Joe, I don't remember. I honestly don't remember. We might
Oh,
have, but I don't know. You have to go look at the records. I'm trying. I don't mean to
uh,
like throw this at you, but I just don't know. What was the coldest temperature ever in October?
I'll say that it actually did get below freezing. I'll say 20. I'll say 28 degrees.
Ding 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 ding. You are correct. You hit it on the nose.
My God,
If Bob Barker was here, you'd
94.
get to reach into his pocket and pick win
I could
$100.
right 94 and 28, and I got them both. Is that
And
amazing?
you want to try the year?
Oh, the year probably before the steamships took over and started polluting the atmosphere. I'll say 1881.
Nice. 1936. Yes.
1936.
What was the coldest daytime maximum?
Oh God. 42.
You know what? Not that far off, Joe. 38 in 1925. That's got to be tough to get a day in October that the temperatures didn't get out of the 30s, but I guess it did. 1925. What was the greatest snowfall in October?
I'm going to say it was the year when we had the snow around Halloween. I think like October 29th, 2.2 inches.
2.9, October 29th, 2011.
2011. See, there you go. I
And
remember
for
that
those
well.
and those of you
I
who
only had 14 inches up here, Joe.
only. And by the way, for many areas, that was the biggest snowfall of the entire winter season. Because the winter of 11 and 12 was, in fact, I remember Joe going up. I went up to New Hampshire because my daughter, who was working at CBS at the time for the CBS, I think she was working for CBS Evening News at that time. She worked for mornings and then she went to the evening news. But I went up with her to cover the New Hampshire primary in early January. Now, think about this. Not only was there no snow anywhere, but even in the mountains, when you looked up where I was, not too far from
Lake
Concord, and
Lake
no,
Winnipesaukee.
no, I didn't go that I didn't go that far north. Um, but when you even in the mountains, Joe, there was very little snowfall. In fact, while I was up there on one day during the night, we had like 5 minutes of flurries and snow pellets, and that was it.
That
That's
was
how.
it.
That was how. That's how. When you're up in New Hampshire at the beginning of January and there's no snow anywhere, there's an issue. Okay, there's a big issue. And the bonus question tonight is how many times in the month of October did Central Park actually measure snowfall? So that would be a tenth of an inch or greater.
Oh, well, there hasn't been all that much in October. Maybe I'll say 3.
Again, just missed four. Four. So
Okay.
I'm impressed. You did really, really well.
Well, thank you, sir.
All right. And on that note, because I'm still kind of recovering from driving 10 hours from Georgia to Fort Pierce. So we will call it a night here. Thank you for everybody that's joining us tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show. Joe and I will be back tomorrow night at 7:30 Eastern at our continuing coverage of Hurricane Ian. And of course, I always put out a video earlier in the day, Weather in 5, which seldom goes 5 minutes. It's almost always more, especially if there's a tropical storm or hurricane. So Look for that on my YouTube channel tomorrow morning sometime, and the Joe and Joe Weather Show at 7:30 Eastern. Why the smirk, Mr. Rayo?
No, I'm just there's no smirk. I was trying to find on the daily local data and records to see if that 94 occurred a few years ago, and maybe the smirk is because the National Weather Service at Upton, they completely changed their format. You used to be able to look at the whole month,
I
and
know.
now you can only do it for one day at a time.
You can. There's a way to do it. I forgot. But you have to play around with it. There's a way to do it. I gotta go in there and figure it out again. I don't remember things well anymore. I barely remember my own name. But no matter. So everybody, we'll see you tomorrow night. Thanks for all the new viewers who took us and the regular viewers who took us to 129 likes today, and the super chat hit. Thank you very much from Steve Lapointe, one of the big supporters here on this channel, both hitting the tip jar and emotionally. Thank you, Steve. And we'll see you guys tomorrow at 7:30 and gals at 7:30 Eastern Time. Good night, Mr. Rayo.
Nighty night, sir. We'll see you tomorrow.
Night, everybody.